The night air hung heavy around the luxurious hotel, its opulence cloaked in an eerie silence that seemed almost unnatural. James, the young and arrogant front desk clerk, took his usual position behind the counter, his posture straight and confident. His crisp suit and polished shoes reflected his pride in his work, though it often bordered on arrogance. He believed he was destined for greatness, and this job was just a stepping stone. As he adjusted his tie, his mind was already calculating how he could use this position to climb even higher. The doors to the hotel's grand lobby swung open, letting in a gust of cool air and an unexpected visitor. An older man, his clothes simple and worn but clean, stepped inside. His presence was an immediate contrast to the luxury surrounding him, and James's eyes narrowed in slight disdain. The man's hair, white and neatly combed, framed a face etched with lines of experience. Despite his humble appearance, there was something in his calm demeanor that unsettled James, though he wouldn't admit it. "Good evening, sir. How may I assist you?" James asked, his voice polite but lacking warmth. The old man approached the counter with a small, kind smile. "Good evening," he replied, his tone soft and respectful. "I'd like to book a room for the night, if you have any available." James hesitated, his eyes scanning the man's appearance. He couldn't imagine this man affording a room in a place like this. A slight frown tugged at the corners of his mouth as he considered his response. "I'm afraid we're fully booked tonight," James said, his voice firm and final. It was a lie, of course, but one he told without hesitation. The old man's smile faltered, but only for a moment. He nodded, as if understanding something unspoken. "I see. Thank you for your time," the man said quietly, turning to leave without another word. As the door closed behind him, James felt a strange sense of satisfaction mixed with unease. He convinced himself that he had made the right decision. As the night wore on, James couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The usual bustling energy of the hotel seemed subdued, the atmosphere heavy with an unexplainable tension. He found himself glancing toward the entrance more than usual, half expecting the old man to return. But the lobby remained empty, and the unease in James's chest only grew stronger. He dismissed it as nothing more than lingering nerves from an odd encounter, but the feeling persisted. Hours passed, and the night deepened, bringing with it an unsettling quiet. James tried to focus on his tasks, but his mind kept drifting back to the old man. Who was he? Why had his presence left such a lingering impact? James told himself it didn't matter, that he had done his job by keeping the hotel's standards high. Yet, the question refused to leave his mind, gnawing at his thoughts like a persistent itch. He found it harder to concentrate, his usual confidence shaken. By the end of his shift, James was more than ready to leave. But as he handed over his duties to the next clerk, the old man's calm, kind eyes haunted him. What had he missed in that brief encounter? As he walked toward the exit, he couldn't resist one last glance at the entrance, half expecting the old man to reappear. But the lobby remained empty, and James shook his head, trying to dismiss the lingering doubts. Still, as he stepped outside, the question hung heavy in the air. Who was that old man, really? James's walk home was filled with restless thoughts, the unease from earlier refusing to fade. He replayed the encounter in his mind, searching for clues he might have overlooked. The old man's calm acceptance of the rejection seemed almost unnatural, as if he had expected it. The more James thought about it, the more uneasy he became. He had prided himself on his ability to judge people quickly, to know who belonged in the hotel and who didn't. But this time, he wasn't so sure. As he reached his apartment, James paused at the door, his hand resting on the knob. For the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of doubt about his own judgment. Had he made a mistake? The thought was unsettling, and it lingered with him as he entered his apartment, the door closing behind him with a soft click. He couldn't shake the feeling that the old man was more than he appeared, and that his presence in the hotel had been no accident. But what could it mean? And why did the encounter leave him so unsettled? After the old man left, a strange stillness settled over the hotel, as if his departure had taken something vital with it. The usual energy that buzzed through the halls seemed to dissipate, leaving behind an uncomfortable quiet. James noticed it first, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that he couldn't quite explain. The other staff members, too, began to feel uneasy, though none could pinpoint the cause. Conversations that usually flowed easily among the employees became strained, and a tension hung in the air, thick and unspoken. Small incidents began to occur, each one seemingly insignificant but collectively troubling. A vase of flowers in the lobby toppled over without warning, shattering on the marble floor. The elevator, which had always operated smoothly, began to malfunction, trapping guests between floors for minutes at a time. Housekeeping reported that items in the rooms were moving on their own, though no one had entered. These strange occurrences were met with confusion and a growing sense of dread among the staff. Despite these events, James remained outwardly unshaken, though the unease gnawed at him. He dismissed the incidents as mere coincidences, rationalizing them away in his mind. But deep down, he couldn't ignore the feeling that something was amiss. The old man's presence lingered in his thoughts, an unwanted reminder of a decision he was beginning to question. Yet, James's pride refused to let him admit he might have been wrong. He clung to the belief that turning the man away was the right choice. The hotel's reputation, however, was beginning to suffer. Guests who had previously praised the establishment's flawless service now whispered complaints about the odd occurrences. Some even checked out early, citing an unsettling atmosphere that made their stay uncomfortable. The manager, a stern woman with years of experience, noticed the decline and called a meeting with the staff. Her eyes narrowed as she addressed them, her tone sharp and demanding answers. But no one could explain the sudden change. As the meeting concluded, James felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. The old man's face flashed in his mind, and for the first time, he wondered if there was a connection between the stranger's visit and the hotel's strange decline. The thought was absurd, he told himself, shaking his head as if to clear it. Yet, the seed of doubt had been planted, and it began to take root in his mind. He found himself growing more irritable, snapping at his colleagues without cause. The tension within the hotel continued to mount, and with it, James's anxiety. Each new incident felt like a personal attack, a reminder of the choice he had made. The other staff members began to avoid him, sensing his growing agitation. Even the guests seemed to notice, their eyes lingering on him a moment too long, as if they could sense his inner turmoil. James's once unshakable confidence was eroding, replaced by a gnawing fear that he had set something in motion that he couldn't control. Late one night, as James was preparing to leave, he heard a faint noise coming from the lobby. Curiosity piqued, he walked toward the sound, his footsteps echoing in the empty hall. The lobby was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of the chandelier overhead. As he reached the front desk, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. The door, which he had personally locked just minutes before, was ajar, a sliver of darkness visible beyond the threshold. James froze, his mind racing. Had someone entered the hotel? Was it the old man, returning after all this time? The thought sent a shiver down his spine, but when he gathered the courage to approach the door and peer outside, the street was empty. The only movement came from the leaves rustling in the wind. James quickly shut the door and bolted it, his hands trembling. He tried to tell himself it was just a mistake, a lapse in his usually meticulous routine, but deep down, he knew something was wrong. As James finally left the hotel, the night air felt heavy, pressing down on him with an almost palpable weight. He couldn't shake the feeling that the old man was somehow still connected to everything that was happening. The question of who the man really was had turned into an obsession, one that haunted his thoughts day and night. Each time he tried to push it away, it returned with greater intensity, gnawing at his mind until he couldn't ignore it any longer. The unknown man had become a shadow in his life, one that James couldn't escape. The days following the old man's departure were marked by an increasing sense of unease that permeated every corner of the hotel. James, though outwardly composed, felt a growing tension in his chest, a constant reminder that something was not right. He went through his routines with a forced air of normalcy, but the strange occurrences continued to escalate. Guests complained more frequently, and the hotel's once sterling reputation seemed to be unraveling. The staff whispered among themselves, casting wary glances at James, as if they held him responsible for the unseen forces at play. One afternoon, as James was organizing some paperwork behind the front desk, a delivery arrived. A large, elegant envelope bearing the hotel's insignia. He opened it casually, expecting another mundane correspondence, but as he read the contents, his heart skipped a beat. It was an announcement, an invitation to a special event to be held in the hotel's grand ballroom. The event, it said, was in honor of the new owner, who had recently acquired the property. James's hands trembled slightly as he continued to read, his mind racing with possibilities. The name on the invitation was unfamiliar, but a cold realization began to dawn on James as he pieced together the fragments of memory. The description of the new owner matched that of the old man he had turned away just days before. Simple clothes, white hair, and an unassuming demeanor. James felt the blood drain from his face as the truth hit him with the force of a hammer. The old man wasn't just a random traveler. He was the new owner of the hotel. The very man James had dismissed so arrogantly now held his fate in his hands. Panic gripped James as he tried to process the enormity of his mistake. How could he have been so blind? His mind raced through the implications, each one more terrifying than the last. He imagined the old man's quiet, kind eyes watching him with disappointment, perhaps even anger. What would the man do now that his true identity was revealed? James's thoughts spiraled into a frenzy of fear and regret, his once firm confidence now shattered into 1,000 pieces. Desperate to confirm his suspicions, James rushed to find the hotel manager, hoping against hope that there had been some mistake. But the manager's stern expression confirmed his worst fears. "Yes, the new owner will be arriving this evening," she said curtly, handing James another copy of the invitation. "He's requested that all staff be present for the event." Her eyes lingered on James for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable passing across her face. James felt a chill run down his spine. There was no denying it now. The man he had so casually dismissed was, in fact, his new boss. As the day wore on, James's anxiety grew unbearable. Every sound, every movement in the hotel seemed amplified, as if the walls themselves were whispering reminders of his arrogance. He couldn't shake the image of the old man's face from his mind, the gentle smile now tinged with a hint of retribution. What would happen when they met again? James couldn't imagine the humiliation he would face, the scorn from his colleagues, the possible repercussions from the new owner. The weight of his mistake bore down on him, suffocating any hope of redemption. By the time the evening arrived, James was a bundle of nerves. He stood in the lobby, surrounded by his colleagues, all of whom were dressed in their finest attire for the event. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, but for James, it felt like the calm before a storm. His eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of the old man. The seconds dragged on like hours, each one filled with the dread of what was to come. When the doors to the ballroom finally opened, James's heart pounded in his chest. As the guests and staff filed into the grand ballroom, James hung back, his fear holding him captive at the edge of the crowd. The room was adorned with lavish decorations, the chandeliers casting a warm, golden light over the scene. But to James, the opulence only heightened his sense of impending doom. He scanned the room frantically, looking for the man he had so carelessly underestimated. When the old man finally appeared, James's breath caught in his throat. There he was, standing at the front of the room, speaking with the hotel manager as if nothing had happened. The old man's demeanor was calm and composed, just as it had been on the night he arrived. But now, knowing his true identity, James saw him in a different light. The old man exuded an air of quiet authority, one that demanded respect without needing to ask for it. James's legs felt like lead as he forced himself to approach, each step bringing him closer to the moment he had been dreading. The crowd parted as he neared, and soon, he stood before the man who held his future in his hands. The moment James stood before the old man, time seemed to slow down, the weight of his mistake pressing down on him like a physical burden. The old man's eyes met his, calm and unreadable, and in that instant, James felt a wave of shame wash over him. His arrogance, his quick judgment, all of it came crashing down as he realized the depth of his error. The man he had dismissed so easily was now the one who held his future in his hands. James's mind raced, searching for the right words, but all he could muster was a quiet, "I'm sorry." The old man simply nodded, his expression giving nothing away. "We'll talk later," he said softly, his voice devoid of anger or reproach. It was this gentleness that struck James the hardest, for it highlighted his own harshness and contrast. As the old man turned to greet the other staff members, James felt a pang of guilt so deep it was almost physical. He had spent his entire career priding himself on his ability to judge others quickly and accurately, but in doing so, he had overlooked the most important qualities of all: humility and respect. The rest of the evening passed in a blur for James. The event that should have been a celebration of the new ownership felt more like a funeral march to him. He couldn't focus on the speeches or the congratulations being exchanged around him. His mind was consumed by the old man's words, simple yet profound, "We'll talk later." What would that conversation entail? Would he be reprimanded? Or worse, fired? The uncertainty gnawed at him, each passing moment adding to the weight of his guilt. As the night drew to a close, James found himself alone in the grand ballroom, the guests and staff having departed. The remnants of the evening's festivities lay scattered around the room, but all James could see was the old man's face in his mind's eye. He replayed their brief conversation over and over, dissecting every word, every nuance. The shame he felt was almost unbearable, a stark contrast to the confidence he had once exuded. How had he allowed his arrogance to blind him so completely? In the quiet of the empty ballroom, James's thoughts turned inward. He realized that his actions had not only affected his own fate, but had also caused a ripple effect throughout the hotel. The strange occurrences, the unease among the staff, even the decline in the hotel's reputation. All of it seemed connected to that one fateful decision. He had let his pride dictate his actions, and now everyone was paying the price. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow, and it left James feeling hollow and defeated. The following days were a torment for James. Each time he saw the old man, now clearly established as the new owner, his guilt intensified. The man treated him with the same quiet kindness he had shown from the start, which only made James feel worse. How could he face someone who had every right to be angry, yet chose instead to be understanding? The more James interacted with him, the more he realized the depth of his own flaws. He had prided himself on his ability to manage the hotel efficiently, but he had failed in the most basic human decency. James's colleagues noticed the change in him. The once confident and somewhat arrogant clerk had become subdued, his usual sharp remarks replaced by an almost painful silence. They whispered among themselves, speculating about what had caused this transformation, but no one dared to ask him directly. James, for his part, was too consumed by his own remorse to notice or care what others thought. All he could think about was the conversation that still loomed over him, the one that could determine his future. When the old man finally called James to his office, the young clerk felt a sense of dread unlike anything he had ever experienced. The walk to the office felt like a journey to the gallows, each step heavy with the weight of his guilt. As he entered the room, he couldn't bring himself to look the old man in the eye. Instead, he stood with his head bowed, waiting for the inevitable reprimand. But what he heard next took him by surprise. "James," the old man said gently, "I want to hear your side of the story. Tell me why you turned me away that night." The question caught James off guard, and for a moment, he was speechless. He had expected anger, perhaps even dismissal, but not this. The old man's voice held no judgment, only a genuine curiosity. James hesitated, struggling to find the right words. How could he explain his actions without sounding like a complete fool? But as he stood there, the weight of his remorse finally broke through his defenses. I was arrogant," James admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I knew everything, that I could judge people just by looking at them. But I was wrong." The days following James's confession felt like a strange limbo, where time seemed to stretch and contract in uneven intervals. He went through his tasks with a heavy heart, each interaction with the old man a reminder of the mistake that had brought him to this point. The man's calm demeanor and understanding had only deepened James's guilt, but it also stirred a resolve within him. He knew he couldn't continue like this, living in the shadow of his own arrogance. He needed to confront the man, not just out of fear of repercussions, but to seek a path forward, whatever that might be. James spent countless hours rehearsing what he would say, the words tumbling over themselves in his mind. Each time, he imagined a different outcome, somewhere he was forgiven, others where he was reprimanded or dismissed. The uncertainty gnawed at him, but he knew that avoiding the confrontation would only make things worse. The old man's kindness had given him a chance, but it was up to James to face the consequences of his actions head-on. And so, with a mix of dread and determination, he decided to approach the old man after one particularly quiet evening. He found the old man sitting in the hotel's small garden, a serene space tucked away from the hustle of the city. The man was seated on a bench, his gaze fixed on the blooming flowers as if deep in thought. James hesitated for a moment, his nerves threatening to get the better of him. But he forced himself to move forward, each step feeling like a final march toward his fate. As he approached, the old man looked up, his eyes softening with recognition. "James," he greeted with a gentle smile. "Come, sit with me." The invitation was unexpected, but James complied, sitting down beside the man, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence between them filled with the sounds of the garden. Birds chirping, leaves rustling in the wind. James could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the words he had rehearsed suddenly elusive. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he needed to say. "Sir," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I know I've wronged you. I misjudged you, and I've been paying the price ever since. I need to know, what happens now?" The old man remained silent for a few moments, his gaze returning to the flowers. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost contemplative. "James, do you know why I didn't react in anger when you turned me away?" he asked, not looking at him. James shook his head, unsure of how to respond. "It's because I've learned over the years that everyone makes mistakes. It's how we handle those mistakes that define us, not the mistakes themselves." The words hit James with unexpected force, the simplicity of the truth piercing through his fear. James's throat tightened as he tried to find his voice. I want to make it right," he said, his words earnest but laced with uncertainty. "I don't know how, but I can't keep living with this guilt. I need to make amends." The old man turned to him then, his eyes full of something James couldn't quite place. Understanding, perhaps, or maybe a hint of sadness. "Making amends isn't always about fixing what's broken," the old man replied gently. "Sometimes it's about learning from it and becoming better because of it." The conversation felt surreal to James, as if he were floating between worlds, the one where he was a proud, arrogant young man and the one where he was humbled by his own actions. He realized that this confrontation was not about the old man's judgment, but about his own. He had been so focused on what the man might do to him that he hadn't considered what he needed to do for himself. "I want to be better," James confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to learn from this and change." The old man nodded, his expression softening. "That's all I wanted to hear," "James," he said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder, "you've taken the first step by acknowledging your mistake. The next step is living up to the lessons you've learned." The weight of the old man's words settled over James, not as a burden, but as a responsibility, a challenge to become the person he now aspired to be. It wasn't about seeking forgiveness. It was about earning it through his actions moving forward. As they sat there in the garden, James felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in weeks. The confrontation he had dreaded so much had turned out to be a moment of clarity, a chance to rebuild himself from the ground up. The old man's kindness had given him not just another chance at his job, but a chance at redemption, a chance to become a better version of himself. And as they parted ways that evening, James knew that his journey was just beginning. The days that followed James's conversation with the old man were marked by a newfound sense of purpose. The words they had exchanged in the garden lingered in his mind, guiding his every action. James knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but he was determined to change. He began to approach his work with a humility he had never known before, taking the time to listen to his colleagues, to learn from them, and to treat each guest with genuine respect. The arrogance that had once defined him was slowly being replaced by a quiet, earnest desire to do better. The old man, true to his word, continued to treat James with kindness, never once mentioning the mistake that had started it all. But it was in his actions that James found the most profound lessons. The old man was a master of humility, leading by example rather than by command. He would spend hours with the staff, helping them with the smallest tasks, always with a smile and a gentle word of encouragement. It was clear that he valued every person, regardless of their position, and this attitude began to permeate the hotel. James watched in awe as the old man interacted with everyone, from the housekeepers to the chefs, always treating them as equals. There was no pretense, no need to assert authority. Instead, the old man earned respect through his actions, showing that true leadership was about serving others, not being served. For James, this was a revelation. He had always believed that to lead meant to be above others, but the old man was teaching him that the greatest leaders were those who lifted others up. One afternoon, while James was assisting a guest with their luggage, the old man approached him with a warm smile. "James, could you join me in the office for a moment?" he asked, his tone as gentle as ever. James felt a familiar flutter of nerves, but he nodded and followed. Inside the office, the old man gestured for James to sit. "I wanted to talk to you about something important," he began, his expression serious but kind. "You've been doing well, and I can see you're trying to change. But there's something more I want you to understand." James listened intently as the old man continued. "Humility isn't just about admitting when you're wrong, though that's a big part of it. It's also about recognizing the value in others, understanding that everyone has something to teach you, no matter who they are." The old man's words struck a chord deep within James. He had been so focused on his own redemption that he hadn't fully grasped this larger truth. "I want you to spend some time working alongside the staff in different departments," the old man said, "not as their superior, but as their equal. Learn from them, and let them learn from you." The suggestion took James by surprise, but he understood its purpose. The old man was offering him a chance to experience humility firsthand, to see the world through the eyes of those he had once overlooked. "I'll do it," James replied, his voice steady with resolve. The old man smiled, a look of approval in his eyes. "Good. Remember, this isn't about proving yourself to me or anyone else. It's about becoming the person you want to be." With that, the old man dismissed him, leaving James to reflect on the task ahead. The following weeks were a transformative experience for James. He spent time in every department, working alongside the housekeeping staff, the kitchen team, and even the maintenance crew. Each day brought new challenges and new lessons. He learned the intricacies of cleaning a room to perfection, the patience required in preparing meals, and the meticulous care needed to maintain the hotel's facilities. But more than the skills, James learned the value of teamwork, the importance of every role, and the dignity in every job. The staff, initially wary of James's presence, gradually warmed to him as they saw his genuine effort to understand their work. He listened to their stories, shared in their tasks, and treated them with the respect they deserved. The barriers that had once existed between him and the rest of the staff began to crumble, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. James was no longer the aloof, arrogant clerk. He was part of the team, and this change did not go unnoticed. As the weeks turned into months, James found that the old man's lesson in humility had reshaped not just his approach to work, but his entire outlook on life. He had come to realize that true success wasn't measured by titles or accolades, but by the impact one had on others. The old man's wisdom had shown him that the greatest fulfillment came from serving others, from being part of something larger than oneself. And with this understanding, James felt a peace he had never known before, a peace that came from knowing he was on the right path. As the months passed, the change in James became evident to everyone around him. The once arrogant and aloof clerk had transformed into a humble and thoughtful young man, his every action guided by the lessons he had learned from the old man. The transformation was not sudden, but gradual, each day bringing new insights and deeper understanding. James no longer saw himself as superior to others. Instead, he viewed every interaction as an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to contribute to the well-being of those around him. The staff, who had once regarded James with a mix of fear and resentment, now looked at him with respect and admiration. They saw how he had embraced the old man's lessons, how he had immersed himself in their world, working alongside them with genuine dedication. James had become a part of the team, someone they could rely on and trust. The walls that had once separated him from the others had crumbled, replaced by bonds of camaraderie and mutual respect. It was clear to everyone that James had changed, not just in his actions, but in his heart. One morning, as James was helping to prepare the dining area for breakfast, he was approached by the old man. "James," he began, his voice warm and approving, "I've been watching you closely these past few months, and I'm proud of the progress you've made. You've not only learned the lessons I hope to teach, but you've also embraced them fully. You've become the person I always believed you could be." The old man's words filled James with a quiet pride, not the boastful kind he once knew, but a deep sense of fulfillment. James looked at the old man, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, sir," he replied, his voice steady, "but I still have so much to learn." The old man smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's the spirit, James. The journey of growth never ends, but you've taken important steps. You've learned to lead with humility, to value others, and to find joy in service. These are the qualities of a true leader, and I have no doubt that you will continue to grow in these areas." The old man's faith in him was palpable, and James felt a renewed sense of purpose. As the days went by, James found himself stepping into a new role at the hotel, one that went beyond his duties as a clerk. He began to take on more responsibilities, not because he sought power or recognition, but because he genuinely wanted to contribute to the success of the hotel and the happiness of its staff and guests. He worked closely with the old man, learning the intricacies of hotel management, from budgeting and operations to guest relations and staff development. Each task was a chance to apply the lessons he had learned, to lead with humility and a servant's heart. The guests, too, noticed the change in James. Many had known him from before, when his arrogance had been almost palpable. Now, they saw a young man who was attentive, considerate, and eager to ensure their comfort and satisfaction. James took the time to listen to their needs, to anticipate their requests, and to go the extra mile to make their stay memorable. His efforts did not go unnoticed, and soon, word began to spread about the exceptional service at the hotel, attracting even more guests and elevating the hotel's reputation once again. James's transformation also had a ripple effect on the staff. Inspired by his example, they too began to adopt a more collaborative and service-oriented approach. The atmosphere within the hotel became one of harmony and mutual respect, where everyone worked together toward a common goal. The old man's leadership, combined with James's growing influence, had created a culture of excellence that permeated every aspect of the hotel's operations. It was a place where guests felt truly cared for, and where the staff felt valued and motivated. But perhaps the most significant change was within James himself. He no longer sought validation through accolades or recognition. Instead, he found fulfillment in the small, everyday acts of kindness and service. He had learned to find joy in the success of others, to take pride in the collective achievements of the team, and to measure his worth by the positive impact he had on those around him. The old man's lessons had become ingrained in his very being, shaping him into a leader who led not from a position of authority, but from a place of empathy and respect. By the time the year came to a close, James had become an indispensable part of the hotel's success. The old man, who had once been an enigmatic figure in his life, was now a mentor and a friend. Together, they had transformed the hotel into a beacon of excellence, where guests and staff alike felt a sense of belonging and purpose. And through it all, James knew that his journey was far from over. The lessons he had learned were just the beginning, and he was eager to continue growing, to become even better, not just as a hotelier, but as a person. As the years passed, James's journey from arrogance to humility became a story that was quietly shared among the hotel staff and guests. His transformation had not only impacted the hotel, but had also left a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed it. James, now a respected leader within the hotel, often reflected on the path that had brought him to this point. The lessons he had learned from the old man were not just about running a successful business. They were about living a meaningful life, one rooted in humility, respect, and service to others. James often found himself in quiet moments of reflection, thinking back to the first time he had encountered the old man. The memory of his arrogance and the shame that followed had once been a source of pain, but now it was a reminder of how far he had come. He realized that his journey had not just been about correcting a mistake. It had been about embracing a new way of being. The old man's wisdom had shown him that true growth came not from avoiding mistakes, but from learning from them and allowing them to shape a better future. The hotel had flourished under the guidance of the old man and the transformed James. It had become a place where people felt welcomed, valued, and cared for, a reflection of the values that both men had come to embody. Guests returned year after year, drawn not just by the luxury of the hotel, but by the warmth and genuine hospitality that permeated every aspect of their stay. The reputation of the hotel had reached new heights, and with it, James had found a sense of fulfillment that he had never thought possible. But the greatest lesson James had learned was the value of time and the wisdom it brought. He had come to understand that change didn't happen overnight. It was a process, a journey that required patience, perseverance, and an open heart. The old man had taught him that every moment was an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to become a better version of oneself. James had embraced this philosophy fully, applying it not just in his work, but in his personal life as well. He had learned to appreciate the small moments, the quiet victories, and the lessons that time so generously offered. As the years went by, the bond between James and the old man deepened. They had become more than just colleagues. They were friends, mentors to one another, each learning from the other's experiences and perspectives. The old man often shared stories of his past, tales of his own mistakes, and the lessons he had learned. James listened with reverence, soaking in the wisdom that came from a life well lived. These stories were like threads in the fabric of James's own life, weaving together to form a tapestry of understanding, compassion, and humility. One evening, as the sun set over the city, casting a warm glow over the hotel, James and the old man sat together in the garden, much as they had on that fateful day when James had first sought guidance. The old man, now much older and slower in his movements, looked out at the blooming flowers with a contented smile. "James," he began, his voice soft but steady, "do you remember the first lesson I taught you?" James nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Yes, I do. You taught me that humility is the foundation of true leadership." The old man chuckled, a sound full of warmth and nostalgia. Yes, and you've lived that lesson well. But there's one more thing I want you to remember, something that time has taught me. James turned to him, eager to hear the wisdom that was about to be imparted. The greatest wisdom, the old man continued, is knowing that we are always learning, always growing. Life doesn't give us all the answers at once. It reveals them slowly, over time. The key is to stay open, to keep learning, and to never stop seeking the truth. The words settled over James like a gentle breeze, their truth resonating deep within him. He realized that his journey was far from over, that there were still lessons to be learned, still growth to be achieved. The old man's wisdom had guided him this far, and now it was up to James to carry that wisdom forward, to continue the legacy of humility, respect, and service that had been passed down to him. He knew that time would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth, but he felt ready to face them with the same open heart that had brought him this far. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the garden in soft twilight, James and the old man sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their thoughts. The wisdom of time had brought them to this moment, a moment of peace, reflection, and mutual respect. James knew that he had been given a gift, not just in the lessons he had learned, but in the time he had spent with the old man. It was a gift he would carry with him for the rest of his life, a guiding light in a world that was constantly changing. When the old man finally rose to leave, James stood as well, offering his arm in support. The old man accepted with a smile, and together, they walked back into the hotel, the warmth of the evening still lingering in the air. As they entered the lobby, James glanced around, taking in the sights and sounds of the place that had become so much more than just a workplace. It was a home, a community, a testament to the power of humility, respect, and the wisdom that only time could bring. As James stood in the quiet lobby, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here, he realized that his story was far from over. The lessons in humility, respect, and the wisdom of time had shaped him into a better person. But there was still so much more to learn. Life's journey is one of continuous growth, and like James, we are all on a path of discovery, seeking to better ourselves and those around us. If James's story has touched you, if it has made you reflect on your own journey, I invite you to stay with us as we continue to explore the depths of human experience. There are more stories to be told, more lessons to be learned, and more wisdom to be shared. Subscribe to the channel and join our community, where every story is a step toward understanding and growth. If you've enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how James's transformation has resonated with you. And if you're eager for more, make sure to hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter in our ongoing journey. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Let's continue to learn, grow, and share in the wisdom that life has to offer.